20 top experts, 3 intense days, $500 million on the line, and just when Mercer Tech was about to concede defeat. A black woman with a mop in hand and her little daughter waiting at home happened to step into the empty conference room, quietly glanced at the whiteboard, and in a single instant changed the future of artificial intelligence with one discovery. She thought no one had witnessed it, but Simon Walker, the notoriously cold, powerful CEO of Mercer Tech, saw everything. What he did next would alter their lives forever. Simon Walker, the most influential figure in American tech, CEO of Mercer Tech, stood silently in the corner, his icy eyes fixed on the chaos worth $500 million flickering on the digital display. The pressure from the AI Project Vanguard, hailed as the company's biggest breakthrough in a decade, had become a ticking time bomb threatening to destroy Mercer Tech's reputation and standing at any moment. For months, millions had been poured into emergency workshops, top experts flown in at exorbitant fees, yet no one could untangle the critical technical glitch. Simon stepped into the center of the room. Each footstep echoed sharply on the marble floor, drawing a sudden hush over the experts. Beads of sweat darkened their expensive collars, and nervous sidelong glances betrayed their failure. In a low voice, as cold as a blade, Simon spoke. "I've paid you millions of dollars, and this is the best you can do, a garbled mess on a screen." No one dared answer. The room felt frozen. Jason Hartley, the head of engineering, once brimming with arrogant confidence, now kept his gaze fixed on the trembling hand resting on his tablet. Simon Walker's stare swept the room, each look an invisible bullet piercing their bruised pride. "We've got exactly 3 days to save this contract fail, and Mercer Tech loses $500 million, let alone our reputation. And believe me, if that happens, none of you will land a janitorial job, much less an AI engineering role, anywhere." With a slam, the conference room door shut behind the CEO, leaving a stifling atmosphere of despair and panic. The experts exchanged looks of utter helplessness. Hope had vanished. Outside the clear glass walls, no one noticed the small, unassuming figure in a faded janitor's uniform, Hannah Cole mop in hand, walking quietly down the gleaming corridor, her expression pensive. She had no idea that destiny was about to make her the savior of Mercer Tech. For in that fleeting moment as she passed, Hannah's gaze had flicked to the jumbled figures on the digital board, and she spotted something amiss, a critical error every expert had overlooked. But at that moment, Hannah simply shook her head, thinking someone like her had no business intervening. She had no inkling that soon the tiny detail she'd glimpsed would spark the chain of events that would change her life, and perhaps the fate of Mercer Tech forever. Hannah walked away from the gleaming hallway outside the conference room, unsettled by the glimpse she'd just caught. But Hannah Cole was all too accustomed to burying her sharp insights beneath her worn janitor's uniform and everyday mop. To her, Mercer Tech was just a job, a way to make ends meet, nothing like the place to showcase the intellect and ambition she'd set aside after a devastating loss. At 36, Hannah was a single mother to 6-year-old Sophia, whose bright, sparkling eyes always looked at her with pure admiration. Every night she left her daughter with a trusted neighbor before clocking in for the overnight cleaning shift at Mercer Tech's headquarters, a building she once thought she belonged in, but that now felt utterly foreign. Few people knew that this small woman with her softly curling hair and deep, thoughtful eyes had been one of MIT's top artificial intelligence students, a future so dazzling anyone would envy it. But fate had never been kind to Hannah. A year before graduation, a sudden accident took away the man she loved most, leaving her shattered and solely responsible for baby Sophia in her arms. Tonight, as she cleaned the tiny office kitchen, Hannah's gaze drifted through the window to the city lights below. She thought of her late husband, Michael Cole, who had always encouraged her to pursue her AI passion, who would say, "Hannah, the world needs people like you, people who see what everyone else overlooks." Those memories of Michael were both comforting and painful reminders of the life Hannah was forced to abandon. She felt she no longer had time or the right to dream. Now she lived every moment for Sophia, working, sacrificing everything so her daughter would never want or feel abandoned. That was why she endured every sneer and icy glance from Mercer Tech's successful professionals. Of all those disdainful looks, none was sharper than Jason Hartley's, the AI team lead, in his expensive suit and designer watch, with the arrogance of someone who'd never known failure. Jason was Stanford-trained, born into wealth, convinced only people like him deserved to be at Mercer Tech. To him, a black woman in a janitor's uniform like Hannah was invisible, just a speck of dust in a shiny building there, only to clean up the messes he made. He never bothered to hide his contempt. More than once, when he bumped into her in the hallway, he didn't even look her way, merely snapping, "Watch it. Don't let your dirty mop water splash on my shoes." Hannah always stayed silent. She knew that in Jason's mind, a person's worth was tied to degrees, money, and power, the very things she'd lost when she walked away from MIT. Jason embodied every prejudice and pressure Hannah faced daily. But rather than fight back, she quietly held on to a fierce belief. True intellect can't be measured by money or designer suits, but by deep understanding and the ability to see what others miss. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Hannah pushed her cleaning cart down the long corridor once more, passing the conference room, where the faint glow still lit the whiteboard, the complex equations standing as a silent challenge. She paused. Taking a deep breath, her dark brown eyes flickered with intense hesitation. A voice inside urged her. She had to go in, prove she was still Hannah Cole, the woman who'd made MIT proud, and that she could solve the problem threatening Mercer Tech's future. But logic quickly pulled her back to reality. Shaking her head, she told herself, "No, Hannah. You're not that woman anymore. That isn't your battle." She gripped her mop handle and continued on, leaving behind the conference room and the $500 million problem still unsolved. What she didn't know was that in just a few hours, her lingering doubt would drive her back into that room this time, not to mop the floor, but to rewrite her destiny and that of Mercer Tech. Hannah's footsteps echoed steadily down the long, cavernous hallway. But this time, as she passed the familiar conference room, she froze as though pulled by an invisible force. Her heart thudded unnaturally fast. Her eyes slipped again to the large glass pane. And there it was. The whiteboard, its complex equations challenging both her intellect and her courage. Hannah stood still for a few seconds, fighting the fierce urge welling up inside her. But this pull was stronger than any hesitation or prejudice she'd ever endured. Finally, as if hypnotized, she set down her mop and slowly stepped into the room. Silence enveloped the space, it so completely that Hannah could hear her own heartbeat. On the whiteboard, a tangle of mathematical symbols and convoluted equations sprawled in chaotic disarray, mirroring Mercer Tech's current despair. Hannah approached the board, her focus razor-sharp, her hands clenching instinctively, a habit from her MIT days whenever she confronted a thorny problem. She studied each character, each formula. Then her eyes widened in astonishment. In the bottom right corner, she spotted a tiny but critical error, one the elite team paid millions had somehow overlooked. Her pulse raced as she realized they had treated a parameter as linear when it should have followed a non-linear function, a mistake that could wreak havoc on the entire project. "Unbelievable," Hannah whispered in the hush, a mix of amazement and exasperation at the senior expert's oversight. For a fleeting moment, she was torn between two impulses, the fear of stepping beyond her janitor's role and the burning desire to correct the error that was costing the company millions. Resolve one out. She grabbed a red marker from the tray, inhaled deeply, and set to work. Boldly, Hannah erased the flawed notation and replaced it with the proper formulation, a clear logical sigmoid function. Her hands, accustomed to wielding a mop each night, now moved with the practiced confidence of the day she once stood before lecture halls at MIT. Within minutes, the whiteboard transformed into a model of clarity and precision. Hannah stepped back, a gentle smile playing on her lips as a weight lifted from her shoulders. She told herself this might be the last time she intervened in such a technical crisis. Unbeknownst to her CEO, Simon Walker had been watching from the shadowed end of the corridor. His cold, ice-blue gaze missed nothing as he quietly observed the janitor silently rewriting a $500 million equation. Simon was not a man who trusted easily, especially in a situation this strange. To him, every action had a motive. But what he had just witnessed defied all logic and calculation. He stared at Hannah, questions flooding his mind. How did an ordinary cleaner spot and fix such a critical flaw? Who was she, and why had she hidden her talent beneath such a humble, enduring facade? Those questions unsettled Simon even as they sparked his curiosity. Standing in the darkness, the powerful CEO of Mercer Tech narrowed his eyes, his suspicion shifting to cold, calculated interest. He understood that this mysterious woman could become a pivotal asset in Mercer Tech's ruthless game of power, or the greatest threat he had ever faced. Meanwhile, Hannah, marker in hand, quietly slipped out of the conference room. She had no idea that her small, seemingly accidental act would unleash a storm at Mercer Tech, one that would not only save the $500 million project, but shake to its core the company's deepest prejudices and ambitions. The moment Hannah's figure vanished around the dark corridor bend, Simon Walker stepped into the eerily silent conference room. The faint glow from the large display cast harsh shadows across his steely features. In his thoughtful eyes, he could still see the equations she'd rewritten, streaks of bright red like fresh blood across the whiteboard. He moved closer, his brow furrowing as he scrutinized every tiny detail the mysterious woman had left behind. Without wasting a second, Simon pulled out the tablet he always carried. His normally steady, precise hands trembled ever so slightly as he entered the whiteboard data into the AI simulation. He pressed execute and watched the screen tense as if awaiting a verdict on his own fate. The tablet lit up. Numbers danced across the screen, instantly processing Hannah's new algorithm. Within seconds, a message flashed. Performance up 58.6%, error reduced to a record low. Simon stood frozen for a heartbeat. Nearly 60%, a figure beyond anything Mercer Tech's experts, whom they'd paid millions to hire, had ever achieved. He glanced back at the whiteboard, his gaze sharpening as he tried to fathom the person behind such an astonishing discovery. To a man like Simon, who prided himself on controlling every variable, the sudden appearance of an unforeseen factor like Hannah was both an opportunity and a potential threat. Simon was never the type of CEO to merely crunch numbers. He'd been a brilliant engineer before ascending to lead Mercer Tech, and he was both respected and feared for his ability to analyze people as quickly as he dissected complex algorithms. He didn't trust easily, especially when the talent in question appeared as enigmatically as Hannah Coles. Standing before the board, Simon replayed the moment Hannah had silently solved what a team of senior engineers could not. From his vantage point in the hallway, he'd detected both hesitation and fierce resolve in her every movement. He couldn't help but wonder, why would someone with such rare intellect choose to work as a janitor cleaning offices in the dead of night? Was it humility, or was she hiding something deeper? Suddenly, the conference room door swung open, jolting Simon from his thoughts. Jason Hartley stood in the doorway, clutching a fresh cup of coffee, his face registering surprise and a flicker of concern at seeing Simon alone in the room. Jason ventured. "Everything okay?" Simon turned slowly, his expression reverting to its customary chill. He regarded Jason, the self-assured engineer, who prided himself on being the best Mercer Tech had to offer a man who'd never been truly challenged before. Yet now, in Simon's eyes, Jason looked patently ordinary, even vulnerable. Simon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked with calm authority, his words like a sharpened blade. "Jason, are you absolutely certain your team vetted this entire algorithm?" Jason chuckled arrogantly. "Simon, we're the top engineers at Mercer Tech. I guarantee no one here could have done better." Simon's lips curved into a cold, knowing smile. "Then explain why a janitor could spot a critical flaw your entire team missed." Jason's grin died, his confidence melting into doubt, then into outright anger. "A janitor? What are you talking about?" Simon stepped closer and pointed at the red markings on the board. His voice was firm, commanding. "A cleaning woman stood right here and corrected this algorithm, Jason. I ran the test and performance jumped nearly 60%, an outcome far beyond anything your experts achieved over the last 6 months." Jason's face flushed with humiliation and fury. But what terrified him more than his own embarrassment was Simon's gaze. Icy, penetrating, as if seeing every crack in his pride and every hidden insecurity. Simon passed Jason, leaning in to murmur his warning before exiting. "Prepare your explanation. Tomorrow, I expect your entire team here to account for how they overlooked a simple mistake worth $500 million. Jason stood frozen in the dim room, the coffee cup growing cold in his hand. Rage and humiliation burned in his eyes as he stared at the red scrawl on the board, the symbols that had awakened a real threat to his position. To Jason, a janitor daring to challenge him was the bitterest insult imaginable. He clenched his fist, vowing that the woman responsible would pay dearly for her intrusion. But Jason had no idea that his fury and blinding arrogance would thrust him into the fiercest power struggle he'd ever faced. One he was utterly unprepared for. The next morning, Mercer Tech's large conference room was packed with AI specialists, senior engineers, and executives. Each faced a mixture of shock and curiosity. By dawn, rumors of the mysterious janitor's appearance had spread like wildfire through every department, ratcheting up the tension to a fever pitch. The door swung open, and CEO Simon Walker entered first, his expression icy as his gaze swept the room. Right behind him came Hannah Cole, the woman usually hidden in the night shift, with her mop, stepping into the room as if she had wandered into an alien world. Hannah felt dozens of eyes scrutinizing her, but forced herself to remain composed, hands clenched into fists at her sides to mask her nerves. Simon motioned for Hannah to take the seat beside him, an honor reserved solely for senior experts. A few engineers exchanged bewildered glances, but no one dared object. Jason Hartley, seated directly across from her, displayed the most contemptuous glare, his lips pressed thin in anger, as if her very presence insulted his honor. Wasting no time, Simon cut to the chase, in a voice that was cool, yet provocative. "Today, I've invited Hannah Cole, the person who discovered and fixed the critical error in our algorithm, an error Jason Hartley's team failed to spot, despite months of work." The room erupted in whispers. Some looked at Hannah skeptically, others with curiosity, but most turned to Jason, waiting for his response. Jason clenched his fists, then let out a mocking laugh that shattered the tense atmosphere. "Simon," he sneered, "don't you think this is a bit absurd? A janitor. Sorry. I mean someone with no credentials or experience invited to a meeting of top experts just because of some fluke. He stared directly at Hannah, his look dripping with contempt and challenge. Hannah. Right. I'm really curious, where did you learn AI? Maybe from free online tutorials, or from eavesdropping on engineers while you cleaned at night. A few attendees snickered. Others shook their heads at Jason's rudeness. Hannah remained silent for a moment, steadying her racing heart. Simon watched in silence. He knew Hannah needed to overcome this test to prove herself. Finally, Hannah lifted her head, her gaze strikingly calm as she met Jason's eyes. I was a student at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, majoring in artificial intelligence. But I suppose you don't care about that, do you, Mr. Hartley? The only thing on your mind is why someone like me could spot an error that you and your so-called experts overlooked. Her voice was soft, yet razor-sharp, silencing the room instantly. Jason hadn't expected such a confident rebuttal. His face flushed as he shot back angrily. I don't care where you studied. What matters is why we should trust a solution from someone with zero qualifications or real-world experience. A single mistake in this algorithm could cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars. This isn't housekeeping. Hannah nodded gently, her tone steady and resolute. Exactly, Mr. Hartley. This isn't a game. And because it matters so much, I chose to intervene. The flaw in the algorithm wasn't complex. I'm sure any clear-headed person could have caught it, but your experts didn't. Maybe the problem isn't skill, but the arrogance of those who believe they can never be wrong. Jason sprang to his feet, rage contorting his features, about to speak again, only to be cut off by Simon's crisp command. That's enough, Jason. This meeting is to assess real results, not for you to nurse your bruised ego. Simon turned to Hannah with an encouraging nod. Hannah, please walk the team through your solution. We want to hear it directly from the person who uncovered the error. Hannah rose and approached the whiteboard once more. The familiar rush of lecturing at MIT flooded back. She took a deep breath, eyes sweeping the room before resting on Jason Hartley, and spoke clearly and confidently. Ladies and gentlemen, the issue in the algorithm was the use of a linear model where a non-linear function was required. That mistake inflated the error margin and destabilized the AI system. By swapping the linear model for a sigmoid function, performance improves by nearly 60%. That's exactly what I did. Silence reigned as everyone stared at Hannah, skepticism giving way to admiration and astonishment. Jason gripped the edge of the table, realizing how cornered he was, his anger and resentment toward Hannah surging. For Jason, this was more than a battle to defend his pride. It was the start of a scheme he intended to launch to eliminate the threat named Hannah Cole from Mercer Tech once and for all. But he had no idea that this reckless vow would plunge him into a power struggle far beyond his control. A heavy silence fell over the room the moment Hannah finished her presentation. Each word she'd spoken had landed with crystal clarity, calm, yet like invisible blades striking at Jason Hartley's pride. Across from her, Jason sat taut as a drawn bowstring, his face rigid with fury and humiliation. He had never been challenged so openly and so forcefully, especially not by someone he'd always dismissed. The tension grew almost suffocating. Simon Walker watched intently, hand on his chin, calculating every reaction. He waited for the inevitable counterattack from Jason. At last, Jason rose, his voice cold but trembling with anger. Hannah, your words sound convincing, but they're just theory. Someone without your level of experience can't possibly grasp the complexity of the AI system we're building at Mercer Tech. I wonder, do you truly understand the risks if your solution fails? Jason emphasized each word, as if pounding on Hannah's hidden insecurities. A few nods of agreement rippled through the room, skepticism creeping back into people's eyes. Hannah met Jason's gaze steadily, refusing to look away. She knew this was a crucial moment, a real battle to defend her honor and her career. Quietly, she replied with a surprising question. "Mr. Hartley, when your kitchen sink is clogged, what do you do?" Jason blinked, brow furrowed in annoyance. "What are you getting at? How does that relate to our AI algorithm?" Hannah offered a confident smile, her tone patient and clear. "It's simple. If your sink is clogged, you fix the blockage. You don't keep pouring water in and hope it magically clears. Mercer Tech's algorithm is stuck in exactly that situation. Instead of addressing the root flaw in its structure, you've been throwing more data and methods at it, making it ever more tangled." A few junior engineers nodded unconsciously. They understood exactly what Hannah meant. Even Simon's face registered a flicker of surprise as Hannah translated complex ideas into such a straightforward yet precise analogy. Unable to accept being outmatched, Jason shot back more harshly. "You really think a plumbing analogy can solve problems worth hundreds of millions of dollars? How naive and unprofessional." Hannah remained composed, her voice measured and unshaken by his mockery. "Mr. Hartley, I'm not oversimplifying the issue. I'm reminding everyone that the best solution isn't always the most complicated. You know as well as I do that the most expensive car won't run properly if one wheel is installed backward. Mercer Tech's AI is no different. The smallest mistake can cause the greatest failure." The atmosphere softened as a few experts began to smile, genuinely appreciating the clarity in Hannah's words. Jason's tension only deepened as he realized he was losing the support of his colleagues. Simon Walker then interjected, his tone still cool, but laced with genuine praise. "I agree with Hannah. We often err by overvaluing complexity and overlooking the simplest faults. This is a lesson for everyone here, including you, Jason." It was like a bucket of ice water to Jason's face. He recognized that his power was more precarious than ever. Yet, instead of backing down, his eyes grew colder and more vicious. He knew that to reclaim his position, he had to remove Hannah Cole from Mercer Tech as quickly as possible. Jason sat down with mechanical stiffness, saying nothing more. But in his mind, a ruthless plan of retaliation was already taking shape. He vowed that Hannah would pay dearly for daring to challenge him. Hannah, sensing the depth of Jason's hostility, did not flinch. She knew she'd entered a war, and the only weapon she could wield was her own confidence and intellect. She glanced at Simon, who nodded subtly in silent encouragement. What Hannah couldn't know was that the battle she'd just joined wasn't merely about defending personal honor. It was a struggle for real power, one fueled by Jason Hartley's envy, resentment, and ambition, ready to engulf her in a dangerous vortex she had never anticipated. The meeting broke up under a low hum of conversation. As Hannah stepped out of the conference room, she could feel every judging, suspicious glance fixed on her. Though the morning sun still shone brightly outside, an invisible shadow seemed to descend over the path she had chosen. In his private office, Jason Hartley stared at his computer screen, knuckles white from gripping the desk. To him, what had happened in that meeting wasn't just a personal failure. It was a direct threat to the power and reputation he'd spent years building. That a nameless janitor would dare challenge Jason Hartley's standing in front of the entire leadership team was simply unacceptable. That afternoon, Jason summoned his most trusted experts to his private office. The small, dimly lit room, illuminated only by an aging desk lamp, felt as brooding and calculating as the people inside. Jason sat at the head of the table, his gaze icy, his voice resolute and cutting. "You all saw what happened today. If we do nothing, that janitor will soon be in every one of our seats. Doing nothing is career suicide." Everyone in the room nodded in grim agreement. These were the seasoned, celebrated engineers of Mercer Tech. They could not tolerate their positions, and honor being threatened by someone like Hannah Cole. Jason pressed on his tone, growing colder. We need to isolate her. No support, no collaboration. On every project and in every meeting, make sure she knows she doesn't belong here. One of the experts spoke up hesitantly, but Jason's CEO Simon seems very impressed with Hannah. Shouldn't we, Jason, cut him off, anger flashing in his eyes. Simon trusts numbers, not the people who run this operation day to day. I guarantee that once Hannah fails, even once, he'll realize his mistake. Jason's plan went into silent but ruthless effect. Over the following days, Hannah noticed odd shifts in her colleagues' behavior. Polite greetings grew scarce. Friendly conversations became curt and cold. Her technical questions in the engineering team were routinely ignored or answered brusquely. In subsequent meetings, Hannah was deliberately left out. Jason accidentally failed to invite her or aggressively dismissed her contributions when she was present. Day by day, Hannah felt more isolated, trapped in the very place she had once hoped to make her mark. Her co-workers' chill wore on her. She began to wonder if stepping out of the shadows had been a mistake. Each morning's walk into the office grew harder. Even those who had once been kind now avoided her, fearful of being caught in Jason's ruthless power play. Late one evening, when Mercer Tech had emptied out, Hannah sat alone in the small staff kitchen, shoulders slumped, eyes heavy with thought. Clutching a cup of cold coffee, she found herself recalling her MIT days when she had friends who stood by her through every challenge. But here, in the vast halls of Mercer Tech, she felt terrifyingly alone. In that moment, Jason Hartley appeared in the kitchen doorway, his gaze hard and threatening. Without waiting for her to speak, he strode forward, voice dripping with malice. How are you feeling, Hannah? Maybe it's time you realize Mercer Tech isn't for people like you. If I were you, I'd return to your janitor's cart. At least there you'd get some respect. Hannah lifted her gaze and met his eyes, tired but unbowed. Her voice was quiet but controlled. Mr. Hartley, I don't think your campaign against me does the company any good. If you actually cared about Mercer Tech, you'd focus on solving real problems instead of wasting energy trying to drive me out. Jason let out a cold laugh, voice dripping contempt. I don't need someone like you telling me how to do my job. Hannah, let me be clear. If you don't leave on your own, I'll make you regret ever stepping into this fight. He turned on his heel and left, arrogance radiating from him, leaving Hannah alone in the dim kitchen. She sat in silence, emotions swirling inside her. She knew that from this moment on, the internal battle she'd stumbled into would only grow fiercer and more unpredictable. And yet Hannah also knew she could not give up, not for her pride, but for her future, and for her daughter, Sophia. She drew in a deep breath, steeled herself, and prepared for the greater challenges ahead, those unseen currents ready to sweep away everything she had worked so hard to build. The days that followed at Mercer Tech dragged on more slowly than ever. Hannah, once brimming with energy and resolve, grew increasingly quiet and exhausted under the weight of systematic isolation. Suspicious glances whispered rumors among colleagues, and above all, Jason Hartley's chilling threats cornered her in a shadow of despair. Late one evening, after the building had emptied, Hannah sat alone in the small office she had once hoped would mark a fresh start. Under the dim yellow light, her face was pensive, her eyes lost in turbulent thoughts. From her desk drawer, she pulled out a photograph of her daughter, Sophia. Those clear, trusting eyes and innocent smile, a gentle reminder of why she had fought so hard to stand tall through this storm. Breathing deeply, Hannah winced as she recalled Jason's cruel words. If you don't walk away on your own, I'll make you regret ever stepping into this fight. She knew he wasn't bluffing. He had the power and the silent backing of Mercer Tech's veteran engineers to turn her life into a living hell. In that still moment, Hannah realized she could endure no more. She couldn't let this suffering define her or jeopardize her daughter's future. A single tear slid down her cheek as she took up a pen and wrote a brief, bittersweet resignation letter. The next morning, Mercer Tech awoke to another day one without Hannah. She left her note on Simon Walker's desk, quietly packed her things, and slipped out before anyone arrived. Her steps out of the building were heavy, each footfall seeming to pull her backward. News of Hannah's departure spread like wildfire. Jason Hartley, upon hearing the news, allowed himself a cold, satisfied smile. Finally, he believed he had succeeded in removing the greatest threat to his position. In his mind, the battle was over, and he was the victor. But Jason had no idea that this fleeting triumph would carry consequences beyond his imagining. Not long after, in his office, Simon Walker sat motionless before his large desk eyes fixed on Hannah's resignation letter. Known for his emotional restraint, Simon nonetheless felt a deep pang of loss and confusion at the sudden departure of this remarkable woman. He recalled the first time he'd seen Hannah fix the algorithm on the whiteboard, his admiration for her calm, incisive retort to Jason in that meeting. He'd also noticed the shift in Mercer Tech's atmosphere since Hannah arrived, a freshness of perspective and creative problem-solving that no expert on his team had brought. What worried Simon more than anything was the immediate fallout of her absence. Within days of Hannah's resignation, the critical AI project spiraled back into chaos. The experts reverted to their old, overly complex methods, ineffective and cumbersome. Jason Hartley's assurances rang hollow as results remained disappointing and stagnant. One late afternoon, Simon stood in the now empty conference room, staring at the whiteboard once more cluttered with tangled equations. He stepped forward, his hand brushing lightly over the lines Hannah had inscribed. In that moment, he realized her true value lay not only in technical know-how, but in her rare ability to unravel problems with intuition, something no one else on his team could match. Furrowing his brow in deep thought, Simon understood that Hannah's departure was far more than a routine resignation. It was a significant loss for Mercer Tech, one that Jason's arrogance and selfishness had forced upon the company. Simon decided it was time to act not only to save the AI project, but to restore the core values Mercer Tech prided itself on: fairness and innovation. Picking up his phone, he spoke with resolute clarity. "Call Hannah Cole in to see me. I don't care how. You tell her I want her back at Mercer Tech immediately." He set the phone down and gazed out the wide window as the city sank into evening shadows. Convincing Hannah to return would not be easy, but Simon knew it was imperative. Mercer Tech more than ever needed someone like Hannah, someone whose brilliant mind was matched by the strength to face the harshest biases and pressures. On the other end of the line, overhearing Simon's request, Jason Hartley's hand clenched into a fist, his face a mask of fury and shock. He realized a terrifying truth he'd never wanted to admit. This fight was far from over, and Hannah Cole would not vanish from Mercer Tech as easily as he had hoped. For Jason, Hannah's return posed not just a threat, but the beginning of a new nightmare, one born from his own hatred and selfishness. Yet he had no idea that his next desperate moves would plunge Mercer Tech into an even deeper crisis. After many days of fierce inner struggle, Simon Walker realized that for the first time in his life, he had to do something he'd never done before: break the cold, rigid rules that had made Mercer Tech so powerful. Hannah's departure taught him that sometimes the most important things can't be measured by numbers or paperwork. That afternoon, bathed in the gentle glow of sunset across the city, Simon left his spacious office, astonishing everyone dressed simply instead of in his usual suit. He drove himself to Hannah's modest address, something he never imagined he would do. He pulled up before a worn apartment building, its paint peeling in large flakes, its rickety stairs leading to Hannah's small unit. Simon walked slowly, eyes scanning every shadowed corner, feeling surprise mingled with guilt. He had never pictured the woman who'd saved Mercer Tech's most critical project living in such hardship. Standing before the tiny door, he summoned his courage and knocked twice. A few seconds later, the door cracked open to reveal a small face and wide, curious eyes. "Who are you, sir?" the little girl asked. Simon started, then quickly smiled kindly. "Hello? I'm Simon. I'm here to see your mother, Hannah." "You're Sophia, right?" Sophia nodded, her bright eyes reflecting rare intelligence, though she still looked wary. "Mom's in the Are You Her Boss, sir?" Simon couldn't help but grin at Sophia's sharpness. "Yes, I work with your mom." Sophia opened the door a little wider, revealing a small but neat, spotless apartment. Under the soft yellow light, a shelf of well-worn AI textbooks sat in order, and an old laptop rested on a simple wooden desk, evidence of Hannah's long nights of self-study after Sophia was asleep. Hannah emerged from the kitchen, a cleaning cloth in hand, and froze when she saw Simon in her tiny apartment. Her eyes flickered with surprise, but she quickly regained her composure. "Simon, what are you doing here?" Simon looked at her for a long moment, finally seeing the toll these months had taken on her. His voice was low, sincere, and direct. "I came because Mercer Tech needs you, Hannah. Not just because the AI project is in peril, but because I realized we were wrong to let you endure all this." Hannah's gaze held deep hurt and suspicion as she shook her head. "Simon, I don't want to go back there. I don't want to keep fighting people like Jason, people who want me gone just because I'm different." Simon was silent a moment, his eyes softening, his tone firmer. "I know Jason and others treated you unfairly. But Hannah, you're not just an employee. You're the one who spotted our most critical mistake that no expert could see. Without you, Mercer Tech would have lost not only $500 million, but also its very soul and values." Hannah bowed her head, her voice barely above a whisper, as if shielding a deep wound. "Simon, I don't know if I have the strength to come back." Sophia, who had been silently listening, stepped forward, her voice small but determined. "Mom, you always tell me we never give up, right?" Hannah looked at Sophia, tears welling. But before she could reply, Simon gently interjected his words, more heartfelt than ever. "Hannah, I'm here not just for Mercer Tech. I'm here because I can't afford to lose you again. We need your intelligence, your resolve, your courage, all the gifts you bring. And this time I promise I will protect you." Simon's sincere, powerful words lifted a weight from Hannah's heart. She met his eyes and saw behind his stern exterior a man who truly understood and was ready to stand by her. Yet she hesitated softly, asking Simon, "Are you sure things will be different this time? I don't want my daughter to see me hurt again." Simon stepped closer, unwavering. "I swear on everything I have. This time will be different. Mercer Tech will no longer tolerate selfish, domineering people like Jason. I will protect you, Hannah. If you trust me, we will change everything together." Hannah looked deeply into Simon's determined eyes. She realized returning to Mercer Tech wasn't just about career or money. It was her chance to reaffirm her worth. And most importantly, this time, she wouldn't be alone. She turned to Sophia, gently stroking her daughter's hair, her voice soft yet resolute. "You're right, Sophia. I never give up. And this time I won't give up either." Simon's eyes shone with quiet joy, relief, and deep resolve. But he had no idea that by bringing Hannah back to Mercer Tech, he was not only challenging Jason Hartley's power, but also setting the stage for a far more brutal and dangerous conflict than he had ever imagined. Deciding to return to Mercer Tech was something Hannah never imagined. But the moment she stepped onto the grand stage at the investment conference, she felt an uncanny sense of calm. Beneath the glare of the stage lights, her eyes swept over hundreds of faces, famous investors, industry experts, and even colleagues who had openly doubted her. Hannah knew this was the most critical battle of her life. But this time, she wasn't standing alone. From the front row, Simon Walker watched Hannah ascend the podium, his gaze full of trust and expectation. He understood that this moment was pivotal, not just for Hannah, but for Mercer Tech's future. Across the room, Jason Hartley sat silently, his cold expression betraying his tension and anger. To Jason, Hannah's return felt like a crushing blow to his pride. Hannah took a deep breath, her eyes steady and clear as she addressed the audience in a straightforward yet compelling voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today, not as a renowned expert, nor as someone with high credentials or a lofty title. I stand here simply as the woman who used to clean offices late at night at Mercer Tech, a single mother determined to show her daughter that we must never give up on believing in our own worth." Instantly, the room fell into complete silence. The audience was captivated by the honesty and relatability in Hannah's words. Below the stage, Simon couldn't help but smile softly, knowing she had just passed through the most important door of all the hearts and faith of her listeners. Jason Hartley, seated farther back, fought to keep his expression cold, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest. Regret and rage warred in his mind. He realized he had inadvertently given Hannah this tremendous opportunity. Yet he refused to back down. He believed she would stumble, would fail, would prove herself unworthy of the attention Simon had lavished on her. Hannah continued, her tone gentle and natural, yet remarkably coherent. "When I first looked at the AI algorithm Mercer Tech had built, I noticed immediately that sometimes we become so fixated on complexity that we forget the most effective solutions are often the simplest." She pointed to the large screen behind her, which clearly displayed the old algorithm's flaw and her proposed fix. Think of a river blocked by fallen logs and debris. Instead of pouring more water in and hoping it clears itself, you simply remove the obstruction. The AI solution, I propose, works on the same principle. Eliminate the core errors rather than endlessly layering on complexity. A few investors began to nod. They had never seen technical issues explained so accessibly. Step by step, Hannah guided the audience from doubt to admiration, from confusion to clarity, using simple language that cut straight to the heart of the problem. Jason felt fury rise, choking him. He saw people shift from skepticism to belief in Hannah. To him, that spelled total defeat, an outcome his pride could not tolerate. Determined to strike back, he prepared his toughest question. As Hannah concluded her presentation, Jason stood and spoke with arrogance and challenge. "Ms. Cole, anyone can offer a simple explanation, but do you dare to guarantee before these investors that your solution will truly perform at scale and is not just theory drawn on a whiteboard?" Hannah looked directly at Jason, her eyes shining with firm resolve. Without hesitation, she replied, "Thank you, Mr. Hartley, for that question. I can guarantee that this solution is not only effective in theory. Mercer Tech has rigorously tested it in large-scale simulation models. With all due respect, the greatest fear we face is not that my solution will fail, but that the stubbornness and prejudice of some will cause us to miss this tremendous opportunity. The entire hall erupted in applause. For the first time, Jason felt completely vanquished. He sank back into his seat, realizing the power and arrogance he'd built over years were now on the brink of collapse. Simon smiled warmly, pride shining in his eyes as he watched Hannah, this woman who had risen from the humblest position to become the centerpiece of Mercer Tech's most important investment conference. In that moment, he understood that Hannah had brought more than a superior technical fix. She had delivered something infinitely more valuable: courage, perseverance, and the spirit to overcome every prejudice in order to rise. But as Hannah stepped down amidst sustained applause, she caught Jason's cold, hate-filled stare. Though she had won today, Hannah knew her battle at Mercer Tech was far from over. In fact, it would grow even more intense and dangerous as Jason's hatred and ambition for revenge deepened. Thunderous applause filled the hall like a crashing wave enveloping the entire conference center. As Hannah descended from the stage, she felt a lightness in her chest, even as her emotions swelled. She had just lived one of the greatest moments of her life. Yet her gaze lingered on Jason Hartley, pale-faced and trembling with barely contained fury. Hannah knew this was far from over for him. The next day's all-hands meeting at Mercer Tech carried a solemn air. Every single employee was present, eyes brimming with curiosity and anticipation. Simon Walker stepped up to the podium, his expression calm, but his eyes sternly fixed on Jason, who sat hunched in the corner, avoiding every probing glance. Simon drew a deep breath. His voice, strong and clear, carried unwavering conviction. Yesterday at the investment conference, we witnessed the triumphant return of a truly remarkable woman. Hannah Cole proved to all of us that real intelligence is never limited by status or credentials. The room fell into absolute silence. Each of Simon's words struck like a hammer blow to anyone who had ever underestimated Hannah. Jason Hartley sat motionless, tension etched into his face as he braced himself. Simon's tone hardened further. In recognition of her exceptional contributions and outstanding performance, I am proud to appoint Hannah Cole as Senior Creative Advisor at Mercer Tech. I hope this marks the beginning of a new era, a vivid reminder that Mercer Tech never overlooks true talent. The hall erupted in applause. Colleagues rose to their feet, honoring Hannah, the same woman they once dismissed, now celebrated as a symbol of courage and visionary intellect. Amid the sustained ovation, Simon turned to Jason, his gaze sharper than ever. However, for us to truly move forward, we must confront past mistakes head-on. One such mistake was the disrespectful attitude and actions of Mr. Jason Hartley toward Hannah Cole. A heavy hush descended as every eye fell on Jason, whose face drained of color and then flushed crimson. His throat went dry, but Simon's unwavering resolve left him with no choice but to stand. Jason rose slowly, each step weighted, as though pulled by gravity, thousands of cold stares pinning him in place. Facing the entire Mercer Tech team, he looked at Hannah with a mix of anger, shame, and deep-seated resentment. Yet he knew that if he remained silent, his career would end on the spot. He drew a shaky breath and spoke, his voice edged with bitterness. I wish to offer my sincere apology to Ms. Hannah Cole. My words and actions caused her deep hurt and harmed Mercer Tech. I was wrong to underestimate her and let arrogance cloud my judgment. I hope she can accept this apology. Hannah met his gaze not with triumph, but with relief and a hint of compassion. She understood that Jason's apology might not be heartfelt, but she also knew it was a necessary step for Mercer Tech to turn the page. Jason promptly returned to his seat, the anger in his eyes clashing with the forced calm on his face. Simon refused to let tension linger. In a measured but powerful voice, he continued, "We have spent far too long valuing degrees over genuine heart and intellect. It's time for Mercer Tech to change that. Hannah is the living proof that a person's true worth lies in what they can achieve, not in their title or background." The room roared with applause once more. Hannah rose and bowed her head humbly, her eyes finding Simon's, the man who had risked stepping out of his comfort zone to stand up for and believe in her. In that glance, Hannah realized she had not only earned a new role, but also gained a true ally. As the meeting ended, Jason quietly retreated to his office. Once the door clicked shut, he clenched his fists and pounded them against his desk in rage. In his heart, hatred for Hannah and Simon burned ever fiercer. He could not tolerate being humiliated before the entire company, and he certainly would not let Hannah escape unpunished. Jason vowed that no matter the cost, he would make her pay back tenfold. Yet he failed to see that his blind, vengeful fury was dragging him toward an abyss of his own making, one born of selfish pride and relentless hatred. And Hannah, exiting the meeting buoyed by pride and relief, had yet to realize that her greatest challenge still lay ahead, a challenge that would determine not only her own future, but the fate of Mercer Tech itself, where she had been entrusted with the mission of rebuilding from the very fragments of bias and past mistakes. After that emotional meeting, Hannah returned to her little apartment just as the city lights were coming on. The soft, golden glow from the window spilled down the worn steps, as if illuminating the fresh path she'd just set foot on. Pausing in front of the familiar door, Hannah hesitated for a moment, then smiled gently when she heard Sophia's bright laughter drifting from inside. Stepping into the small but cozy living room, Hannah was surprised to see Simon Walker sitting right next to Sophia, both of them laughing together over the scattered pieces of a jigsaw puzzle on the little table. Simon looked up when he saw Hannah enter. His eyes were softer than she'd ever seen, as though he'd been waiting all day for her to come home. "Mom's home." Sophia squealed with excitement, dashing forward to wrap her arms around Hannah. Simon rose and stepped slowly toward Hannah, his voice warm and sincere. "Congratulations, Hannah. You truly deserve all that you achieved today." Hannah blushed, her heart stirring at Simon's heartfelt words. The same man once known as a cold, powerful CEO, now standing before her with unexpected tenderness. Sophia looked up at Simon with mischievous, innocent eyes, as if she'd already sensed something unfolding between the two adults. "Uncle Simon, you said you'd ask Mom something when she got home, so go ahead, ask." Simon looked slightly flustered by Sophia's prompt, but he quickly regained his composure and gave the little girl a gentle smile. "You're right, Sophia. I'm about to ask." He moved a step closer to Hannah, took her hand softly, and looked deeply into her eyes with unmistakable sincerity and emotion. "Hannah, when I first walked into Mercer Tech, I believed that degrees and status were everything. But then you came along and taught me that a person's true worth isn't measured by those things. It's measured by the heart and the grit to overcome any challenge." His voice trembled ever so slightly, his gaze more genuine than ever. "I know our lives have been through so many trials, and you've endured so much. But Hannah, I don't want to be just your colleague or friend anymore. I want us to move forward together, not as strangers, but as a real family. Will you marry me?" Hannah stood frozen for a heartbeat, her heart racing, the world around her fading until only Simon's earnest eyes remained. Sophia held her breath beside her, clutching her stuffed bear as she waited. Finally, Hannah smiled, tears welling not of sorrow or pressure, but of the deep joy she'd longed for. "Yes, Simon, I'll be your family." Sophia leaped up in delight and hugged them both. Her laughter filled the small room, making the space feel warmer and more joyful than ever. That night they sat together on the tiny balcony of the apartment, looking out over the city's twinkling lights. Sophia rested her head on her mother's shoulder while Simon held Hannah's hand. The three of them gazed at the starry sky in peaceful silence, knowing this was the most precious moment of their lives. Hannah leaned her head against Simon's shoulder and whispered, her voice gentle and full of emotion, "Simon, I never imagined my life could change like this. All the prejudices and hurtful words I've faced no longer matter, as long as we have each other." Simon smiled softly and squeezed her hand, his eyes drifting over the city lights. "You're right, Hannah. From now on, we'll never let anything, no prejudice or selfish ambition, harm our little family again." Meanwhile, not far from Hannah's apartment, Jason Hartley sat alone in his darkened room, his heart full of bitterness and regret. He still couldn't accept that Hannah, the woman he once dismissed and tried to undermine, had not only beaten him at work, but had triumphed in life as well. Jason knew he had lost everything because of his arrogance and selfishness, but his resentment still burned. Yet he understood that this time he had lost utterly. This battle was beyond his power to reverse. On the balcony, Simon, Hannah, and Sophia sat side by side, enjoying their peaceful moment. They looked out at the distant city, the thousands of lights, a reminder that there is still so much beauty and hope in the world, waiting to be discovered. Hannah took a deep breath and smiled happily, whispering to Simon and Sophia, "We'll always have each other, and from now on, nothing can stop our little family from moving forward." In that moment, they all understood that prejudice and hardship no longer mattered. As long as they stood together, the best of life was yet to come. True worth lies not in titles or background, but in the courage to overcome challenges and the strength to touch one another's hearts. What do you think of this inspiring story? Would you have the courage to overcome social prejudices the way Hannah did? If this story moved, you don't forget to hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you won't miss our next uplifting tale. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.